What does it mean to resist the darkness, not the shadow that creeps across the land? Born of dragonfire or wraith's breath, but the deeper gloom, the one that gnaws within whispering of gold, of power, of a legacy carved in stone and blood. In the tales of Middle-earth, where mountains stand as sentinels and rivers sing of ages past, we find a dwarf Thorin Oakenshield, whose heart was both a forge and a battlefield, a place where honor wrestled with greed, where the weight of a crown unborn threatened to crush the spirit of a king. This is no mere recounting of battles fought or treasures won, but a journey into the marrow of a soul, a meditation on what stirs the heart to break free from its own chains. Come, let us walk the paths of Erebor, not as heroes seeking glory, but as wanderers seeking truth, peering into the mists of fear, burden, legacy, loss, silence, temptation, faith, and hope. In the beginning there was a mountain. Not just any mountain, but Erebor, the lonely one, a pinnacle of stone that pierced the sky like a blade, its roots deep in the earth, its halls alive with the clang of hammers and the glow of molten gold. To the dwarves it was more than a home, it was a heartbeat, a living testament to their craft, their pride, their unyielding will to shape the unshapable. And in its heart lay the Arkenstone, a gem of such radiance it seemed to hold the light of the stars themselves, a beacon of divine favor, a symbol of a king's right to rule. But stone endures where hearts falter, and when Smaug the fire drake descended in a storm of flame, the halls of Erebor became a tomb, the dwarves scattered like leaves before a gale, their king. Thror broken by loss, his mind clouded by the lust for what was taken. Thorin, son of Thrain, son of Thror, carried this wound like a blade lodged in his chest. He was young then, a prince without a palace, a leader without a people watching as his kin wandered the wilds, their songs of gold replaced by the dirge of exile. Fear was his companion in those days, fear not of death. For dwarves are forged of sterner stuff, but of fading, of becoming a whisper in the annals of time, a line of kings reduced to beggars. What is a dwarf without a mountain? What is a king without a crown? These questions haunted him, stalking his steps through the blue mountains where he labored as a smith, his hands blackened by soot, his heart hardened by memory. The fire of Erebor still burned in his dreams, a vision of halls reclaimed, of a throne restored, but fear whispered, what if the fire consumes you too? And so the burden grew, not just the weight of a lost kingdom, but the weight of a name, Oakenshield, earned in battle, when a broken bow became his shield against the axes of orcs. It was a title of valor, yes, but also a reminder of all he must carry, the hopes of his people, the honor of his line, the promise of a home. In the quiet of the night, as the winds howled through the crags, Thorin would sit by the fire, his eyes tracing the flames, and feel the burden settle deeper, a stone upon his shoulders heavier than any armor. To be a king is to bear the unbearable, to walk a path where every step is a test, every choice a wound. He thought of his father Thrain, lost to the dungeons of Dol Guldur, his cries swallowed by shadow, and wondered if leadership was not a crown but a chain. Legacy, that ancient word, sang to him like a harp in the halls of his mind. The line of Durin, eldest of the dwarf fathers, stretched back to the waking of the world, a thread of strength and sorrow woven through the ages. Thorin saw himself as a link in that chain, not the first nor the last, but one who must not let it break. His grandfather Thror had fallen to greed his love for gold, twisting into a madness that invited Smaug's wrath. Thorin swore it would be different, that he would reclaim Erebor, not for wealth, but for honor, for the songs of his people to echo once more. Yet in the silence of his heart, he felt the pull of legacy, like a tide drawing him toward the same abyss. Was he destined to repeat the sins of his kin? Or could a dwarf born of stone, carve a new path. Loss was no stranger to Thorin. He tasted it in the ash of Erebor, in the absence of his father, in the faces of the dwarves who looked to him for hope and found only a wanderer. Loss is a blade that cuts both ways, severing what was and what might have been. In the wilds, as he led his people from one refuge to another, Thorin learned its weight, its sharp edges. He mourned not just the gold, not just the stone, but the laughter of children in the halls, the pride of a forge, a light, the unity of a people unbroken. And yet loss taught him silence, a stillness that settled over him like frost. He spoke less, listened more, his words guarded his thoughts a fortress. In that silence he heard the echoes of the past, the voices of his ancestors urging him onward, whispering of a mountain waiting to be reclaimed. But temptation crept in subtle as a shadow. It began as a spark, a flicker of desire for the Arkenstone, for the gold that lay beneath Smaug's coils. In the long years of exile, as he toiled in human villages, bartering skill for bread, the thought of wealth grew louder, a siren's call promising power, respect, a throne. Temptation is not a dragon to be slain, but a mirror showing us the face we fear to see. Thorin saw his grandfather in that mirror, Thror's eyes alight with gold lust, and shuddered. He told himself he sought Erebor for his people, for the legacy of Durin, but in the dark he wondered, was this quest his own, or was it the mountain calling him to its doom? The temptation to claim, to possess, to hold the Arkenstone in his hands, and feel its light as his own. It was a fire in his blood, one he fought to quench, and yet faith lingered fragile as a flame in the wind. Faith in the strength of his companions, in the wisdom of Gandalf the Grey, who came to him in a tavern's dim light, a map in hand, a key in pocket, speaking of a quest to reclaim what was lost. Faith in Bilbo Baggins, a hobbit of the Shire, small and untested, yet bearing a courage Thorin could scarcely fathom. Faith in the old songs, the ones sung by dwarves in exile of a king, beneath the mountain of a home reborn. Thorin held this faith like a coal, warm but fleeting, fearing it would gutter out. He did not pray to Mahal the Maker, as some did, but he felt the stir of something ancient, a belief that the world, for all its shadow, still held light for those who dared to seek it. Hope, then, was the thread that bound him, not a loud hope, not a banner raised in triumph, but a quiet one, a whisper in the heart. It was hope that drove him to gather his company, Dwalin, Balin, Kili, Fili, and the rest 13 dwarves, and a hobbit, a fellowship forged not by might, but by a shared dream. Hope led him through the wilds, past the troll's fire, through the stone giant's clash, into the goblin's lair, each step a defiance of despair. Hope was the song of the wind in the pines, the glint of starlight on a blade, the memory of Erebor's halls alive with light. And yet hope is a fragile thing, easily buried beneath the weight of doubt, of fear of the dragon that waited in the dark. So Thorin walked on his boots, heavy on the earth, his heart a battleground. The road to Erebor was no straight path, but a winding trail through shadow and stone, a test of will, of spirit. He thought of the map, the key, the words of Gandalf. There is a way, if you have the courage to take it. Courage, yes, but also something deeper, a willingness to face the self, to stand before the mirror of temptation and not flinch. Thorin felt the eyes of his ancestors upon him, the weight of their legacy, the sting of their loss. He heard the silence of the wilds, the temptation of the gold, the faint pulse of faith and hope, and he wondered, as the mountain loomed ever closer, what it would take to break the greed that threatened to claim him. The journey began in earnest. A company of 14 setting out from the Shire Bilbo's home, a strange contrast to the wilds ahead. The hobbit, with his love of comfort, his pipe and hearth, seemed an odd companion for a quest of such gravity. Yet Thorin saw something in him, a spark, a resilience hidden beneath the softness. The road was long, The nights cold, the dangers many. Trolls sought to roast them, stone giants hurled boulders in their mountain dance, goblins snarled in the depths of the misty mountains. Through it all, Thorin led his voice steady, his axe ready, though his heart wrestled with shadows. Each step brought Erebor nearer, each night brought dreams of gold, of a throne of a stone that shone like the heart of a star. Fear returned sharper now as the wilds grew darker, not the fear of death, but the fear of failure, of leading his kin to ruin, of standing before the gates of Erebor only to fall. The burden of leadership pressed harder, the eyes of his company, Dwalin's loyalty, Balin's wisdom, Kili and Fili's youth, watching, waiting, hoping. Legacy whispered through the trees the names of Durin, Thror, Thrain, a litany of duty and doom. Loss stung anew the memory of Erebor's fall, a wound unhealed the silence of the night, a mirror to his own. Temptation grew, a vision of the Arkenstone of gold piled high, of a king's power restored. Faith flickered, sustained by the strange courage of a hobbit, by Gandalf's quiet counsel. And hope, fragile hope, carried them forward, a light against the gathering dark. In the halls of the goblins beneath the mountains, Thorin faced a trial of fire and shadow. Captured, bound, surrounded by snarling foes, he stood tall, his voice a defiance, his will a shield. Bilbo, small and unseen, slipped through the dark, a riddle on his lips, a ring in his pocket, and Thorin marveled at the hobbit's heart, so unlike his own. They escaped borne by eagles, the wind of freedom in their hair, and Thorin felt the stir of something new, a gratitude, a bond, a sense that this quest was not his alone. The mountain loomed closer, its peak a challenge, its depths a mystery. What lay within a dragon, yes, but also a mirror, a test of who Thorin was and who he might become. And so the road wound on through forest and dale toward the lonely mountain. Fear walked beside them, a shadow in the trees. Burden weighed heavy, a stone in the chest. Legacy sang its ancient song, a call to honor, a warning of doom. Loss lingered, a ghost in the silence. Temptation whispered a promise of gold, a lure of power. Faith held a flame in the midst, fed by the courage of companions. Hope glimmered a star in the night, guiding them to Erebor's gate. And there before the mountain Thorin would stand, his heart, a forge, his will, a blade, seeking the truth of what might break the greed that threatened to claim him. The road to Erebor wound on a ribbon of dust and danger, threading through the wilds, the lonely mountain rising like a sentinel in the distance, its peak shrouded in mist, its heart a mystery of fire and shadow. Thorin Oakenshield led his company, 13 dwarves and a hobbit, through the tangled depths of Mirkwood, where the air grew thick, the light dim, and the silence oppressive. The eagles had borne them from the goblin halls, their wings a gift of grace, but now the earth reclaimed them, and the forest whispered of trials yet to come. Fear, burden, legacy, loss, silence, temptation, faith, and hope wove through Thorin's thoughts, a tapestry of struggle, each thread pulling at his soul as the mountain drew near. This was no mere march, but a pilgrimage, a descent into the self where the dragon waited, not just Smaug, but the beast within the greed that flickered like a flame, hungry for gold, for power, for a crown. Mirkwood loomed a realm of endless shadow, its trees twisted their branches, clawing at the sky, their roots drinking deep of ancient sorrow. The path faded, swallowed by moss and gloom, and Gandalf the grey pilgrim turned aside his staff, a fading light. His words, a cryptic charge. Stay the course and do not stray. Thorin felt the weight of those words, a burden added to the many he bore, for now the company looked to him alone, their eyes bright with trust, heavy with expectation. Fear stirred anew, not of spiders or darkness, but of leading them astray, of failing the hope they carried. The air grew heavy, the forest a labyrinth, and in the stillness Thorin heard the echo of his own heart, beating like a drum, a rhythm of doubt and duty. The burden of leadership pressed harder, a mantle of stone upon his shoulders. Dwalin, steadfast and strong, gripped his axe, his loyalty a rock. Balin, wise and gentle, offered counsel, his eyes searching Thorin's for signs of strain. Keely and Feely, young and bold, laughed in the face of danger, their youth a mirror to Thorin's weathered resolve. Bilbo the Hobbit stumbled along, his small frame dwarfed by the trees. Yet his presence a puzzle, a quiet strength Thorin could not name. To lead was to carry them all their dreams, their lives, their faith in a king without a kingdom. In the night, as the forest closed in, Thorin sat apart, his hands tracing the map, the key, the promise of Erebor, and felt the weight settle deeper, a question unasked. Could he bear them to the end? Legacy sang through the shadows, a haunting melody of Durin's line, the fathers of the dwarves, their deeds etched in stone, their names afire in the blood. Thorin saw Thror, his grandfather, in the dark, his eyes wild with gold lust, his hands clutching the Arkenstone, a king undone by desire. He saw Thran, his father, broken by loss, vanishing into the depths of Dol Guldur, a cry swallowed by night. The line of Durin stretched back to the waking of the world, a chain of honor, of sorrow, and Thorin felt its links tighten around him. He was their heir, their hope, tasked to reclaim the mountain, to restore the glory of his kin. But legacy was a double-edged blade, promising greatness, threatening ruin. And in the forest's gloom he wondered, was he forging a new tale or walking his grandfather's path to doom? Loss lingered like the damp of Mirkwood, a chill that seeped into the bones. The company hungered, their provisions gone, their spirits waning, and Thorin felt the sting of every empty belly, every weary step. He mourned the Erebor of old, its halls of light, its forges, bright now, a dragon's lair, a grave of memory. Loss was the absence of laughter, the silence of the hammers, the scattering of his people across the wilds. In the forest, as spiders spun their webs, their eyes glinting like malice, Thorin fought his axe a blur, his heart a storm, and saw the cost of loss in every near miss, every cry of his kin. Bilbo, small and swift, cut them free, a blade from the shadows, and Thorin marveled, the sting of loss eased by a hobbit's courage, a flicker of light in the dark. Silence reigned in Mirkwood, a heavy, living thing broken only by the rustle of leaves, the skitter of unseen things. Thorin embraced it, his words few, his thoughts a fortress, for in silence he heard the past, the songs of his people, the roar of Smaug's fire. The forest tested them, its paths twisting its air, a fog of doubt, and in that quiet Thorin felt the weight of eyes, his company, the trees, the ancestors watching, waiting, captured by the wood elves bound in their halls of root and starlight. Thorin stood before Thranduil, the elven king, whose cold gaze and colder words spoke of ancient grudges, of gold and gems unshared. Silence was his shield, his defiance, and in the dungeons, as the key to Erebor hung heavy in his pocket, he clung to it, a dwarf, alone with his purpose. Temptation crept closer, a whisper in the dark, born of the forest's spell, of the long road's weariness. The Arkenstone haunted him, a vision of light, a symbol of right, a promise of power. In the Elven King's halls, Thranduil spoke of treasure, of the wealth of Erebor, and Thorin felt the stir of desire, a hunger for gold, for the throne, for the stone that would name him king. Temptation was no loud call, but a subtle tide pulling at his heart, painting pictures of a mountain reclaimed, of riches piled high, of a legacy secured. He saw Thror, in his mind clutching gold, lost to madness, and fought the mirror's gaze. The fear that this quest, this dream, was not for his people, but for himself, a dwarf consumed by the fire he sought to wield. Faith flickered a fragile flame as Bilbo worked his quiet magic, slipping through shadows, a key in hand, a plan in mind. The Hobbit, unlooked for, unlocked their chains, led them to the river, to barrels bobbing in the current, a path to freedom. Thorin watched, soaked and weary, and felt faith stir, not in gods or fate, but in this small creature, this burglar who defied the odds. Gandalf's words echoed a charge to trust, to believe. and Thorin clung to it, a lifeline in the flood. Faith was no certainty but a choice, a step into the dark, and as the barrels carried them toward Lake Town, toward the mountain, he held it close, a shield against the doubt, a spark against the night. Hope glimmered faint but fierce as the spires of Lake Town rose from the mist. A human realm of wood and water, a stepping stone to Erebor. The people greeted them wary but warm, their master, a man of greed, his eyes on gold, his words honeyed. Thorin stood tall, a king in exile, and spoke of promises of a mountain reclaimed, of wealth to share, and hope bloomed in the eyes of men, in the hearts of his kin. It was a quiet hope, a vision of halls alive, of forges lit, of a people whole. Yet as they armed themselves, as boats bore them toward the mountain, hope wrestled with fear, with the shadow of Smaug, with the weight of what lay ahead. Thorin felt it, a thread of light pulling him on, a song of what might be. The mountain loomed, its slopes stark, its silence deep, and Thorin's heart beat like a drum, a rhythm of dread and desire. The hidden door, marked by the map, waited, a threshold of stone, a gate to destiny. The key in his hand, a relic of his father, trembled, and the company watched. Their breaths held, their eyes bright. Fear whispered of failure, of a dragon's wrath, of a quest undone. Burden pressed the weight of a people, a line, a dream. Legacy sang a call to honor, a warning of ruin. Loss lingered, the echo of a home lost, a kin scattered. Silence held a moment of stillness, a breath before the plunge. Temptation roared, a vision of the Arkenstone, of gold, of power. Faith flickered, fed by the loyalty of his kin, the courage of a hobbit. Hope shone a star in the dark, a promise of dawn. The door opened, a creak of stone, a breath of cold air, and Thorin sent Bilbo forth, the burglar, the unlooked for, into the dark. The hobbit vanished, a small figure against the vastness, and Thorin weighted his heart, a forge, his will, a blade. Bilbo returned, his voice a whisper, his eyes wide, speaking of a dragon of gold, of a stone that shone like the heart of a star. The Arkenstone there within reach, a beacon of right, a lure of greed. Thorin felt the tide rise, the hunger, the need, and fought it. His hands clenched, his mind a storm. What was this quest, a reclaiming of home or a descent into desire? The mountain held its breath, and Thorin stood a dwarf on the edge, seeking the truth of what might break the greed within. Smaug stirred, a rumble in the deep, a fire in the dark, and the company braced their axes, ready, their hearts racing. Thorin led, his voice steady, his eyes on the gold, the stone, the dragon. Fear was a wind chilling the bone, whispering of death. Burden was a chain binding him to his kin, his duty. Legacy was a song ancient and urgent, a call to rise, to fall. Loss was a shadow, the memory of fire, of flight. Silence was a weapon, a calm before the storm. Temptation was a flame, the Arkenstone's light, the gold's gleam. Faith was a spark, the trust in his company, the belief in a hobbit. Hope was a thread, a vision of victory, a dream of dawn. And Thorin, son of Thrain, son of Thror, walked into the fire, seeking what might break the greed before Erebor's gate. The mountain breathed its depths, a cauldron of shadow and heat, the air thick with the scent of ancient stone and smoldering fire. Thorin Oakenshield stood at the threshold of Erebor's heart, the hidden door behind him. The vastness of the dragon's lair before him, a realm of gold and peril stretching into the dark. The company, 13 dwarves and Bilbo Baggins. The hobbit clustered close, their breaths shallow, their eyes in axes, and courage gripped tight. Smaug the fire drake slumbered atop a sea of treasure, his scales a molten armor, his presence a weight upon the soul. Thorin felt the pulse of the mountain, a rhythm of dread and desire as fear burdened legacy loss. Silence, temptation, faith, and hope battled within a storm in his chest, a forge where his spirit was shaped. This was no mere confrontation, but a descent into the abyss, a mirror held to the heart, where the question lingered what might break the greed that clawed at him before Erebor's gate. The Hall of Kings stretched vast and silent, its pillars carved by hands long gone, their echoes swallowed by the dragon's reign. Gold lay in heaps, a glittering tide, coins, goblets, chains, and gems, a wealth to beggar empires, and atop it all, a glimmer faint but fierce. The Arkenstone, the heart of the mountain, a star caught in stone. Thorin's breath caught his eyes, drawn to it. A beacon of legacy, a lure of power. Fear stirred not of Smaug's fire, but of himself, of the hunger that rose like smoke, whispering of a throne, a crown, a name eternal. What was he here for, the home of his people or the glory of his own? The dragon slept a mountain of malice, and Thorin felt the chill of doubt, the weight of a choice yet unmade as the company looked to him, their king, their guide. Burden pressed heavier now, a yoke of stone and duty. Dwalin's strength, Balin's wisdom, Kili and Fili's fire, the loyalty of Dori Nori, Ori, the steadiness of Gron on Bifur, Bofur, Bumbur, all rested on him, their hopes a chain, their trust a trial. Bilbo, small and trembling yet unyielding, stood apart, his eyes searching the dark, his heart a mystery. To lead was to carry to bear the weight of lives, of dreams, of a mountain lost and longed for. Thorin's hand tightened on Oance's sword, Orcrist, its blade a cold comfort, its edge a promise. In the quiet, as the dragon's breath rumbled, he felt the burden deepen, a question carved in whose omnus bones could he lead them through. The pillar, or would he break beneath the load? Legacy sang a deep, resonant note, the song of Durin, father of dwarves, whose hands shaped stone, whose will forged a people. Thorin saw the line of his kin, Thror mad with gold, Thrain lost to shadow, stretching back through time, a river of pride and pain. Erebor was their birthright, its halls, their story, its wealth, their testament. The Arkenstone light of their house called to him a symbol of right, a proof of kingship. But legacy was a blade sharp and double-edged, cutting through doubt, tempting ruin. In the dragon's lair, as gold gleamed, Thorin heard the echo of his grandfather's fall, the greed that woke Smaug, and wondered, was he heir to honor or to doom? The mountain watched its silence, a judge, its depths, a test. Loss wove through the air a thread of sorrow sharp as a shard. The Hall of Kings, once alive with song, with the clang of hammers, the laughter of kin, lay desecrated, a dragon's hoard, a tomb of memory. Thorin felt the sting loss of home, of father of the dwarves scattered to the winds, their pride buried in ash. He saw it in the faded runes, the broken statues, the ghosts of a people driven out. Loss was a wound unhealed, a hollow in the heart, and as Smaug stirred a rumble in the gold, Thorin tasted it anew, the ache of what was the shadow of what might never be. Yet in Bilbo's eyes, wide with wonder, with fear, he saw a spark, a defiance of loss, a light to cling to. Silence held a heavy cloak wrapping the company in its folds. The hall was still save for the dragon's breath, a slow, deep hiss, a storm waiting to break. Thorin moved his steps soft, his heart loud, leading them deeper, eyes on the gold, on the stone. Silence was his ally, a shield against the fire, a space to think, to feel. In that quiet he heard the past, the songs of Erebor, the cries of its fall, and the present, the shallow breaths of his kin, the hobbits' whispered courage. Bilbo crept forth a shadow among shadows, tasked to see to steal, and Thorin watched, silent his thoughts, a tempest, his will a wall. The mountain held its breath, and in the stillness the question grew, what would he become in this dark? Temptation roared a fire in the blood, as the gold gleamed a sea of light, a promise of power. The Arkenstone shone a star in the gloom, calling to Thorin, singing of kingship, of glory of a dwarf made eternal. He saw himself crowned, revered, the wealth of Erebor, his the mountain, his the world bowing to Durin's heir. Temptation was a mirror showing Thror's face, eyes, wild, hands, grasping, and Thorin recoiled. yet felt the pull, the hunger. Was this for his people, for the halls of stone, the songs of old, or for him, a dwarf consumed by desire, a king lost to greed? Smaug's eyes opened slits of fire, and the temptation surged, a tide to drown in a test of the heart. Then the dragon spoke, a voice like thunder, deep and ancient, a rumble that shook the gold, the stone, the soul, thief in the shadows. Smaug hissed, his gaze piercing his words. A blade, I smell you, little burglar, and the stink of dwarves, greedy, grasping, come to steal my hoard. Bilbo, small and brave, stood his ground, his voice a riddle, a dance of words, and Thorin watched, heart pounding, as the hobbit faced the fire. Smaug laughed, a sound of scorn of power, and spoke of gold, of the Arkenstone, of the folly of dwarves, their lust, their doom. Temptation flared the dragon's words, a fuel fanning the flame in Thorin's chest, the desire to claim, to hold, to be king. Yet in Bilbo's defiance a spark glowed, a challenge to the dark. Faith flickered, fragile but fierce, as Bilbo wove his web of words, naming himself barrel rider, ring winner, a friend of bears and eagles. Smaug raged, his fire a storm, and the company hid their breaths, held their hopes pinned to a hobbit. Thorin felt faith stir, not in fate, not in stone, but in this small soul, this unlooked-for ally, whose courage burned brighter than gold. The dragon's fire lit the hall, a blaze of wrath, and Thorin led his voice a call, his sword a shield, guiding his kin through shadow, through flame. Faith was a choice, a leap into the void, a trust in Dwalin's might, Balin's mind, Bilbo's heart. In the heat as Smaug roared, Thorin clung to it, a flame against the night, a belief in something beyond the gold. Hope glimmered, a thread of light as they fled the dragon's wrath, gold scattering fire licking at their heels. Bilbo, swift and sly, had seen the Arkenstone, had danced with death and lived, and Thorin felt hope rise, a vision of a mountain reclaimed, of halls alive, of a people whole. They fought, axes, flashing hearts, racing, a desperate stand against the fire drake, a defiance of despair. Hope was no loud cry, but a quiet pulse, a whisper of dawn, a dream of Erebor restored. Yet Smaug rose, a storm of scales and flame, his wings a thunder, his eyes a curse, and flew a shadow of vengeance toward Lake Town, toward men. Thorin watched hope trembling, a star in the storm, as the mountains stood waiting, watching. Fear surged, a wind through the hall, as Smaug's shadow faded, his fire a promise of ruin. Thorin felt it, the chill of failure, the dread of loss, the weight of a town doomed by his quest. Burden grew, the lives of men, of dwarves, of a hobbit, all his to bear, his to break. Legacy echoed the song of Durin, a call to rise, a warning of fall. Loss stung the memory of Erebor, the threat of more. Silence settled, a pause in the chaos, a breath to think. Temptation burned the Arkenstone, near its light, a lure, its power, a trap. Faith held a spark in the dark, fed by the company, by Bilbo's deed. Hope lingered, a fragile glow, a path to dawn. And Thorin stood, a dwarf in the fire, seeking what might break the greed before Erebor's gate. The hall was theirs for now, a sea of gold, a realm of stone, the dragon gone, but not vanquished. Thorin walked among the treasure, his steps slow, his eyes searching the Arkenstone, a whisper in his mind, a pulse in his blood. The company cheered, their voices a song, their hearts alight. But Thorin felt the storm within, the battle of will, of want. Fear whispered of Smaug's return, of a king unmade. Burden weighed the hopes of all, the cost of all. Legacy sang a charge to claim, a risk to lose. Loss loomed, a shadow of fire, a ghost of home. Silence wrapped him, a space to wrestle, to choose. Temptation pulled a tide of gold, a stone of stars. Faith flickered, a trust in kin in a hobbit's heart. Hope shone, a dream of light, a king reborn. And Thorin, son of Thrain, son of Thror, stood in the mountain, seeking the truth of his soul. The mountain stood a silent witness, its halls of stone aglow with the flicker of torchlight. the air heavy with the scent of gold and the echo of a dragon's wrath. Thorin Oakenshield paced the vastness of Erebor, the sea of treasure stretching beneath his boots, coins and goblets, rings and blades, a wealth beyond dreams. And somewhere within the Arkenstone, the heart of the mountain, a star imprisoned in crystal. Smaug had flown a storm of fire and fury, his wings a thunder, his eyes a curse bearing down on Lake Town, leaving the dwarves and Bilbo the Hobbit in a hall of victory and dread. Fear, burden, legacy, loss, silence, temptation, faith, and hope swirled in Thorin's chest, a tempest of spirit, a forge where his heart was tested. The question lingered sharp as a blade, what might break the greed that clawed at him before Erebor's gate. This was no tale of triumph, but a plunge into the soul, a dance with shadow, a search for light. Fire raged beyond the mountain, a distant glow on the horizon, the cry of Lake Town's fate carried on the wind. Thorin stood at the gate, his eyes tracing the night. His heart a drum of fear, not of Smaug's claws, but of the cost, the lives of men, women, children burning for his quest. He had sought Erebor, a home for his people, a throne for his line, but now the flames painted a truth. Every step bore a price, every dream a scar. Fear was a chill, a whisper of failure of a king who led not to glory, but to ruin. The company gathered, Dwalin's fists clenched, Balin's gaze, heavy Keely and Feely's youth dimmed by worry, Bilbo's small form trembling yet steady. Thorin felt their eyes, their trust, and feared he was unworthy, a dwarf lost in the dark. Burdens sank deeper, a weight of stone and blood heavier than the mountain itself. He bore the hopes of his kin, Dori, Nori, Ori, Gloin, Oin, Bifur, Bofor, Bombur, each a life, a story, a dream, pinned to him. Bilbo, the unlooked for, stood apart, his courage, a quiet flame, his presence a riddle. To be king was to carry all, to shield all, to risk all. Thorin's hand gripped Orcrist, its hilt cold, its edge a vow, but the burden pressed a chain of duty, a yoke of guilt. The fire of Lake Town burned in his mind, a mirror of Smaug's wrath, a question carved in flame. Had he woken the dragon, or had the dragon woken him? Could he bear this load, or would it crush him before the gate? Legacy sang, a deep ancient chord, the voice of Durin, father of dwarves, whose hands shaped the world, whose will built Erebor. Thorin felt the line of his blood thror, undone by gold, Thrine broken by shadow, a chain stretching through time binding him, to honor tempting him to doom. The Arkenstone called a light in the horde, a proof of kingship, a symbol of right. Legacy was a fire warming the heart, burning the soul, promising a name, eternal warning of a fall. In the hall, as gold gleamed, Thorin saw his grandfather's madness, the greed that called the dragon mesh, and felt the echo in himself, a pulse of desire, a fear of fate. The mountain watched its stone, a judge, its silence, a challenge. Would he forge a new tale or repeat the old? Loss cut deep, a blade of sorrow sharp and unrelenting. Erebor's halls, once bright with song, with the glow of forges, lay silent, a dragon's hoard, a grave of dreams. Thorin mourned the past, the laughter of kin, the pride of craft scattered by fire, lost to Exile. Now Lake Town burned, a new wound, a fresh grief. The cries of men, a dirge in the night. Loss was a shadow, a hollow in the chest, a memory of what was, a dread of what might be. He saw it in the company's eyes, weary, haunted, and in Bilbo's face, pale but firm, a hobbit far from home, yet here. Loss taught him pain, but also purpose, a spark in the dark, a will to reclaim what endured. Silence settled, a heavy veil wrapping the hall in stillness. The fire's distant roar faded, the wind's whisper stilled, and Thorin stood his breath, a rhythm, his thoughts a storm. Silence was a refuge, a space to wrestle, to weigh. He paced the horde, his steps soft, his eyes searching the Arkenstone, whisper in the gloom, a lure in the quiet. The company rested, their voices hushed. their hopes unspoken, and Thorin felt the weight of their gaze, the burden of their weight. In the silence he heard the past, the songs of Erebor, the screams of its fall, and the present, the beat of his heart, the call of his quest. The mountain held its breath, and in the stillness, the question grew, what would he choose in this dark? Temptation surged, a tide of fire as the gold shone, a sea of wealth, a promise of power. The Arkenstone glimmered a star in the horde singing to Thorin, a vision of kingship, of glory, of a dwarf made mighty. He saw himself crowned, revered, the mountain his, the world at his feet. Temptation was a mirror showing Thror's eyes wild with greed, hands clutching gold. And Thorin trembled, yet leaned closer, the hunger rising, a flame in his blood. Was this for his people, for the halls of stone, the songs of old, or for him, a king consumed, a soul lost to lust? The horde whispered, the stone beckoned, and temptation pulled a current to drown in a test of will. Faith flickered a fragile glow as Bilbo spoke, his voice soft, his words sharp. The dragon's gone, but not dead, and Lake Town pays the price. The Hobbit, small and steadfast, stood before the horde, his eyes clear, his heart true, and Thorin felt faith stir not in fate, but in this unlikely soul, this burglar who braved the fire. The company rallied Dwalin's strength, Balin's counsel, Kili, and Fili's fire, a bond forged in trial. Faith was no promise, but a leap, a trust in kin in a hobbit's deed. Thorin clung to it, a shield against doubt, a spark against despair, as the mountain loomed. The horde glowed, and the question lingered, could faith hold against the gold? Hope glimmered, a thread of light, faint but fierce, as they fortified the gate stone on stone, a wall against the storm. Thorin led his voice steady, his hands sure, a vision of Erebor, reborn halls alive, forges, lit a people whole. Hope was no cry of triumph, but a quiet pulse, a whisper of dawn, a dream of home. Yet the fire of Lake Town burned a shadow on the heart, and Smaug's fate hung unknown, a threat in the night. Bilbo watched his gaze steady his courage, a beacon, and Thorin felt hope rise, a star in the dark, a path through the shadow. The mountain stood waiting, and hope carried him a fragile light, a song of what might be. The night deepened, and word came borne by a thrush, ancient and wise. Smaug had fallen slain by Bard, a man of Lake Town, an arrow to the dragon's heart. The company cheered, a roar of joy, axes raised, but Thorin's heart wavered relief, warring with dread. The dragon was gone, the horde theirs, but the Arkenstone called a siren in the gold, and the fire of men's ruin smoldered still. Fear whispered a chill of what next, of armies, of claims. Burden grew, the weight of a kingdom, of a people burned. Legacy sang a call to rise, a risk to fall. Loss stung the ashes of Lake Town, the ghosts of Erebor. Silence held a pause to think, to choose. Temptation burned the stone near its light, a trap. Faith flickered, a trust in kin, in Bard, in Bilbo. Hope shone, a dream of peace, a king tested. Men and elves came a host at the gate. Bard of Dale grim and tall Thranduil, of Mirkwood cold and bright, their voices raised their claims clear aid. For Lake Town a share of gold gems of old. Thorin stood atop the wall, his eyes hard, his heart a storm. The Arkenstone a pulse in his mind, a proof of right, a fire of want. Fear flared, a dread of loss, of yielding. Burden pressed a king's duty, a people's need. Legacy echoed Durin's line, a throne to hold. Loss lingered, a scar of fire, a debt unpaid. Silence wrapped him, a shield, a trial. Temptation roared, the stone his the gold, his the power, his. Faith wavered, a trust in kin, a doubt of men. Hope trembled, a vision of peace, a risk of war. And Thorin stood a dwarf at the gate, the greed rising, the truth unseen. He spoke, his voice a blade cold and sharp. No treasure leaves this hall, not while I breathe. Bard pleaded, Thranduil warned, but Thorin saw only the gold. The stone, the crown, his right, his due. The company stood with him loyal, strong, but Bilbo's eyes, wide and quiet, pierced him a mirror to his soul. Temptation surged, a tide of desire, the Arkenstone a star to claim, a king to make. He searched the hoard, his hands frantic, his heart racing, seeking the stone, the heart of his claim, the proof of his reign. Fear gnawed, a dread of betrayal, of loss. Burden crushed, a king alone, a people at stake. Legacy sang, a fire of pride, a shadow of doom. Loss cut, a wound of trust, a home unwhole. Silence held a storm within, a choice to come. Faith flickered faint but real as Balin spoke, his voice soft, his wisdom deep. Thorin, son of Thrain, remember why we came, not for gold, but for home. The words struck a spark in the dark, a call to the dwarf. He was the king he could be. Bilbo watched, silent, steady, a hobbit's heart. A mystery, a strength. Faith was a thread, a trust in kin, in counsel, in a small soul who braved the fire. Thorin felt it, a warmth against the cold, a light against the greed, and clung to it, a shield, a hope. The gate held, the host waited, and the mountain breathed its stone, a witness, its hoard, a test. What would break the greed that gripped him, the fire that burned within? Hope glimmered, a fragile star, as the night stretched. The tension grew, a standoff at Erebor's gate. Thorin paced his mind, a battlefield. The Arkenstone a ghost, the gold a chain. Hope was a vision, a hall of song, a people reborn, a king true. Yet the host beyond men and elves spoke of war, of blood, of a dream undone. Fear whispered, a chill of strife, a king unmade. Burden weighed, a duty to hold, to yield. Legacy called, a name to forge, to lose. Loss stung, a trust, broken, a home divided. Silence wrapped a space, to see, to be. Temptation pulled a stone, to claim a throne, to seize. Faith held a spark of kin, of Bilbo's deed, and Thorin, son of Thrain, son of Thror, stood seeking what might break the greed before Erebor's gate. The mountain stood unyielding, its stone a silent judge, its halls a crucible where gold gleamed and hearts were forged. Thorin Oakenshield, son of Thrain, son of Thror, stood upon the ramparts of Erebor. The gate sealed the hoard within the Arkenstone, a phantom in his arms, in his mind, its light a fire in Mdan's blood. Beyond the wall the host of men and elves waited. Bard of Dale, grim with purpose, Thranduil of Mirkwood, cold as starlight, their voices raised in claim, their banners a challenge. The air was taut, a bowstring drawn, and Thorin's heart was a storm torn by fear, burden, legacy, loss, silence, temptation, faith, and hope. The greed that gripped him, a chain of gold, tightened yet somewhere faint as a whisper. A truth stirred, a light to break the dark. This was no tale of crowns won or battles fought, but a journey to the soul's edge, a revelation not of triumph but of surrender, a song fading into memory. Fear coiled a serpent in the chest as Thorin gazed at the host below. Not fear of swords or arrows, for dwarves are born of stone, but fear of unraveling, of a legacy lost, of a king unmade by his own hand. The Arkenstone heart of the mountain was missing its absence, a wound, a betrayal he could not name. He saw enemies in every shadow, men seeking gold, elves seeking gems, his own kin perhaps faltering. Fear whispered of isolation, of a dwarf alone, a king without a people. His quest a spark that lit a war. The company stood with him, Dwalin's strength, Balin's wisdom, Kili, and Fili's fire, yet their eyes held questions, and Thorin feared the answers, dreaded the mirror they held to his soul. Burden crushed a weight beyond stone, a yoke of duty and dread. He bore the dreams of his kin, Dori, Nori, Ori, Glon, Oin, Bifur, Bofur, Bumbur, each a life entrusted, a hope pinned to his will. Bilbo the Hobbit stood apart, his small form a quiet defiance, his gaze a mystery. To be king was to carry all, to stand unbowed. Yet Thorin felt the cracks, the strain of a heart stretched thin. The host beyond sought justice, Laketown's ashes, a debt unpaid, and Thorin bore that too, the guilt of fire, the cost of his dream. Burden was a chain linking him to his people, to his past, to the mountain, and he wondered as the wind howled, could he hold or would he break? Legacy sang a deep, mournful note, the voice of Durin, father of dwarves, whose hands carved Erebor, whose will shaped a people. Thorin felt the line of his blood Thror, lost to greed. Thrain broken by shadow, a river of pride, of pain flowing through him. The Arkenstone was its emblem, a star of right, a proof of kingship, and its absence gnawed a void in his claim, a crack in all his name. Legacy was a fire warming, consuming, promising glory, threatening ruin. He saw his grandfather's madness, the gold lust that woke Smaug, and felt its echo, a pulse in his veins, a call to hold, to claim to be king. The mountain watched its stone, a witness, its silence, a test. Would he forge a new path, or falls to the old? Loss cut a blade of sorrow sharp and deep. Erebor's halls once alive with song. With the glow of forges lay silent a hoard of memory, a tomb of dreams. Thorin mourned the past, the scattering of his kin, the absence of his father, the fire that drove them out. Laketown's fall was a fresh wound, a cry in the night, a debt he could not pay. Loss was a shadow, a hollow in the heart, a weight of what was, what might never be. He saw it in the company's eyes, weary, strained, and in Bilbo's face, pale but resolute, a hobbit far from home, yet steadfast. Loss taught him grief, but also longing, a spark to reclaim, to restore, to endure. Silence wrapped the ramparts, a heavy cloak, a space to think, to feel. The host below was quiet, their fires aglow, their intent a pressure. Thorin stood, his breath a rhythm, his thoughts a tempest, the Arkenstone a ghost in the dark. Silence was his refuge, his trial a mirror to the soul. He heard the past, the songs of Erebor, the screams of its fall, and the present, the winds whisper the company's breaths. Bilbo watched, his eyes clear, his silence loud, and Thorin felt the weight of that gaze, a question unasked, a truth unseen. The mountain held its breath, and in the stillness, the choice loomed. What would he become in this hour? Temptation roared, a fire in the blood, as the hoard below gleamed a sea of gold, a throne of power. The Arkenstone, though lost, sang to him a vision of light, a promise of might, a dwarf crowned eternal. He saw himself king of the mountain wealth, his shield, the world his due. Temptation was a mirror showing Thror's eyes wild with lust, hands grasping, and Thorin leaned into it, the hunger surging, a tide to drown in. Was this for his people, for the halls of stone, the songs of old? Or for him, a king consumed, a soul chained to gold? The host's demands, gold for men, gems for elves, were a theft, a wound, and temptation whispered, hold fast, keep all be king. The mountain's heart pulsed, and Thorin burned, a dwarf in the fire, a soul at the edge. Faith flickered, a fragile flame, as Balin spoke his voice. A balm, his wisdom, a light. Thorin, son of Thrain, you are more than gold, more than stone. Remember the road, the kin, the home we sought. The words pierced a spark in the dark, a call to the dwarf. He was the king he could be. Dwalin's loyalty, Kili and Fili's fire, the company's bond, they held him, a thread of trust, a shield against despair. Bilbo, small and quiet, stood near his presence, a riddle, his courage a beacon. Faith was a choice, a leap into the void, a belief in kin in a hobbit's heart, in a truth beyond the hoard. Thorin clung to it, a warmth in the cold, a light in the shadow, as the gate stood. The host waited, and the question burned. Could faith break the chain? Hope glimmered, a star in the night, faint but fierce as the dawn crept near its light, a promise, a challenge. Thorin saw it, a vision of Erebor, reborn halls. Alive, forges lit a people whole. Hope was no cry of triumph, but a quiet pulse, a whisper of dawn, a dream of peace. Yet the host below spoke of war, of blood, of a mountain contested, and hope trembled a fragile thread, a light in the storm. Bilbo's eyes, steady clear, held something Thorin could not name, a spark of truth, a call to see. Hope was a path, a step through fear, a will to endure. The mountain stood waiting, and hope carried him a song of what might be a dream, of what could break the greed within. Then came the blow, a truth like a blade, sharp and swift. Bilbo stepped forward, his voice soft, his hands trembling, a small stone in his grasp, the Arkenstone heart of the mountain light of Durin's line. "I took it," he said, his eyes meeting Thorin's unflinching, though fear shone there. "I took it to end this, to save us all, to give to Bard, to buy peace." The words struck a thunder in the silence, a crack in the wall of greed. Thorin's heart roared betrayal. A fire, rage, a storm, and he seized Bilbo, his hands a vice, his voice a snarl. "Traitor, thief!" The company gasped. Dwalin, stepping near Balin's hand, raised, but Bilbo stood small and steady, a hobbit before a king, a truth before a lie. Fear surged, a wave of dread, not of war, but of loss, of trust broken, of a dwarf alone. Burden crushed, the weight of betrayal, of a king forsaken, a people divided. Legacy screamed, the Arkenstone stolen, Durin's line shamed. Loss cut a wound of faith, a hobbit's bond severed. Silence shattered, a roar of rage, a cry of pain. Temptation flared, a call to strike, to hold, to claim. Faith wavered, a flame in the wind, a trust undone. Hope flickered, a star dimmed, a dream unmade. Thorin lifted Bilbo, his hands trembling, the edge of the rampart near, and saw the mirror Thror's madness, his own greed, a king lost to the fire. But then a voice, small but clear, cut through the storm. Thorin Bilbo set his eyes be, his heart bare. "This is not you. This is the gold, the stone, the sickness. Let it go." The words were a light, a breath, a truth. Thorin froze his hands, loosening his rage, faltering, and saw in Bilbo's face not a thief but a friend, a soul who braved the dragon, who bore the stone, who risked all for peace. Faith stirred, a spark, reborn, a trust in this hobbit, this unlooked-for ally, who saw the dwarf beneath the king, the heart beneath the greed. Thorin sent Bilbo down, his hands shaking, his breath ragged, and stepped back the rampart, a line the horde, a chain. Silence returned, a heavy grace, as the company watched, their breaths held, their eyes wide. Thorin stood, his heart a forge, his will a blade, and felt the tide shift, the greed weaken, the truth rise. Loss was a teacher, showing the cost of pride, the pain of mistrust. Legacy was a guide, not a chain, a call to honor, not to hold. Burden was a duty, not a curse, a weight to share, not to bear alone. Fear was a shadow, not a master, a challenge to face, not to flee. Temptation was a test, not a truth, a fire to quench, not to feed. Faith was a flame fed by kin, by Bilbo's deed, by a hobbit's heart. Hope was a star, bright and steady, a vision of peace, a path to dawn. He turned to the gate, to the host below, and spoke, his voice clear, his heart open. "Let us talk, Bard. Thranduil, let us find a way, not of war, but of right." The words were a release, a breaking of chains, a step from the dark. The company cheered, soft at first, then loud, a song of relief, of pride. Bilbo smiled, a small, weary smile, and Thorin met his eyes, a nod, a bond restored. The Arkenstone given to Bard was no loss, but a gift, a bridge to peace, a light to share. The mountain stood its stone, a witness, its halls, a hope, and Thorin felt the greed fade, a fire cooled, a truth revealed. But fate turned a shadow on the wind, as horns sounded not of men or elves, but of orcs. A host from the north, a tide of malice led by Azog the Defiler. The mountain, the gold, the peace they drew, the enemy a storm of blades, a call to war. Thorin rallied, his heart clear, his purpose true, and led not for gold, not for stone, but for kin, for home, for hope. The battle came, a clash of steel, a cry of courage, and Thorin fought Orcrist, a flame his company a shield, Bilbo a spark in the fray. Fear was there, burden heavy, legacy alive, loss near silence, broken temptation gone, faith strong, hope bright. And Thorin, son of Thrain, son of Thror, stood before Erebor's gate, a king not of gold but of heart, his greed broken by a hobbit's truth, his soul a song fading into memory.